This book is a brief introduction to the art of making arguments. It sticks to the bare essentials. I have found that students and writers often need just such a list of reminders and rules, not lengthy introductory explanations. This book is therefore organized around specific rules, illustrated and explained soundly, but above all, briefly. It is not a textbook, but a rule book. Instructors, too, I have found often wish to assign such a rule book, a treatment that students can consult and understand on their own, and that therefore does not claim too much class time. Here again, it is important to be brief. The point is to help students get on with their actual arguments, but the rules must be stated with enough substance that an instructor can simply refer a student to Rule 6 or Rule 16 rather than give an entire explanation each time it is needed. Brief but self sufficient. That is the fine line I have tried to follow. This rulebook also can be used in a course that gives critical attention to arguments. It will need to be supplemented with exercises and more examples, but many texts are already available that consist largely or wholly of such exercises and examples. Those texts, however, also need to be supplemented with what this rulebook offers: simple rules for putting good arguments together. We do not want our students to come out of critical thinking courses knowing only how to shoot down or just at selected fallacies. Critical thinking can be practiced in a far more constructive spirit. This book is one attempt to suggest how. Note to the fifth edition. Rulebook continues to find a wide use in a variety of schools from high school to law school, and in other settings too. The world continues to change as well. In this fifth edition, there are several corresponding changes. Most notably, I have added a new final chapter, Public Debates, which repositions a few of the old rules but mostly adds new ones. The state of our public debate at the moment is pretty sorry, and while this surely has many causes, a better understanding of the etiquette and the ethics of good public debate should help. Six short rules, but what a difference they might make. Smaller changes include a number of updated examples, drawing on a wider and more contemporary range of sources. Goodbye Einstein, hello Beyonce. This edition is a little fresher and a little tighter, a bit more humorous. Some of the rules have acquired punchy subtitles. This is no time to be timid about the need for good arguments and better ways of arguing either. So you may find this new edition somewhat edgier as well. For instructors and students who may be interested, I am happy to add that a companion textbook, a rulebook for arguments, is now available. David Moreau and I have written ourselves a workbook for argument. Workbook includes the entire rulebook, but between each section of this brief guide, workbook interpolates further explanations and extensive examples and exercises, with a thorough selection of sample answers as well. Many thanks to Professor Moreau for convincing me and Hackett Publishing Company of the need for the appeal of such a textbook, and then doing the lion's share of the work on it, carrying it now through two editions, the first edition in 2013 and the second edition in 2016. David's insight and suggestions have helped shape this new edition of Rulebook as well. Among related changes is that a few of the more challenging examples and themes in previous editions of Rulebook, most notably philosopher David Hume's challenges to some of the usual arguments for the existence of God, are migrating to Workbook, where they can be treated in more depth. In many ways, Workbook is a natural follow up to Rulebook. Even if you are not in a class that requires it, we hope you will have a look. By now, it is a long list of colleagues, students, family members, and friends who have contributed thoughts, suggestions, or provocations to this and previous editions of Rulebook. This time around, I would like to single out Deborah Wilkes, president and publisher, and her colleagues at Hackett Publishing Company, whose stalwart support and gentle encouragement has made both rulebook and workbook continuously enjoyable and superlatively produced projects. My continuing gratitude to you all. Anthony Weston, July 2017. Introduction. What's the point of arguing? Many people think that arguing is simply stating their prejudices in a new form. That is why many people also think that arguments are unpleasant and pointless. One dictionary definition for argument is disputation. In this sense, we sometimes say that two people have an argument, a verbal fistfight. It happens often enough, but it's not what arguments really are. In this book, to give an argument means to offer a set of reasons or evidence in support of a conclusion. Here, an argument is not simply a statement of certain views, and it is not simply a dispute. Arguments are efforts to support certain views with reasons. Arguments in this sense are not pointless. In fact, they are essential. Argument is essential in the first place because it is a way of finding out which views are better than others. Not all views are equal. Some conclusions can be supported by good reasons. Others have much weaker support. But often we don't know which are which. We need to give arguments for different conclusions and then assess those arguments to see how strong they really are. Here, argument is a means of inquiry. Some philosophers and activists have argued, for instance, that the factory farming of animals for meat causes immense suffering to animals and is therefore unjustified and immoral. Are they right? Why can't necessarily tell just by consulting our current opinions? Many issues are involved. We need to examine the arguments. Do we have moral obligations to other species, for instance? Or is only human suffering really bad? How well can humans live without meat? Some vegetarians have lived to very old ages. Does this show that vegetarian diets are healthier? Or is it irrelevant when you consider that some non vegetarians also have lived to be very old ages? You might make some progress by asking whether vegetarians live to an old age at a higher rate, or might healthier people tend to become vegetarians? Rather than this, vice versa, all of these questions need to be considered carefully, and the answers are not clear in advance. Argument is essential for another reason, too. Once we have arrived at a conclusion that is well supported by reasons, we use arguments to explain and defend it. A good argument doesn't merely repeat conclusions. Instead, it offers reasons and evidence so that the other people can make up their minds for themselves. If you become convinced that we should indeed change the way we raise and use animals, for example, you must use arguments to explain how you arrived at your conclusion. That is how you will convince others, by offering the reasons and evidence that convinced you. It is not a mistake to have a strong views. The mistake is to have nothing else. Arguments grow on you. Typically, we learn to argue by assertion. That is, we tend to start with our conclusions, our desires, or opinions without a whole lot to back them up. And it works, sometimes at least, when we're very young. What could be better? Real arguments, by contrast, take time and practice. Marshalling our reasons, proportioning our conclusions to the actual evidence, considering objections, and all the rest. These are acquired skills. We have to grow up a little. We have to put aside our desires and our opinions for a while and actually think. School may help or not. In courses concerned with teaching ever larger sets of facts or techniques, students are seldom encouraged to ask the sorts of questions that arguments answers. Sure, our Constitution mandates the Electoral College. That's a fact. But is it still a good idea? For that matter, was it ever a good idea? What were the reasons for it, anyways? Sure, many scientists believe that there is life elsewhere in the universe, but why? What's the argument? Reasons can be given for different answers. In the end, ideally, you will not only learn some of those reasons, but also learn how to weigh them up and how to seek out more for yourself. Mostly, again, it takes time and practice. This book can help. Moreover, the practice of argument turns out to have some attractions of its own. Our minds become more flexible, open minded, and alert. We become to appreciate how much difference our own critical thinking can really make. From everyday family life to politics, science, philosophy, and even religion, arguments are constantly offered to us for our consideration, and we may in turn offer back our own. Think of an argument as a way to make your own place within these unfolding, ongoing dialogues. What could be better than that? Outline of this book. This book begins by discussing fairly simple arguments, moving then to extended arguments and their use in essays, oral presentations, and finally to public debates. Chapters 1 through 6 are about composing and assessing short arguments. Short arguments simply offer their reasons and evidence briefly, usually in a few sentences or paragraph. We begin with short arguments for several reasons. First, they are common. In fact, so common that they are part of everyday conversation. Second, longer arguments are usually elaborations of short arguments or a series of short arguments linked together. If you learn to write and assess short arguments first, then you can extend your skills to longer arguments in essays or presentations. A third reason for beginning with short arguments is that they are the best illustrations, both of the common argument forms and of the typical mistakes in arguments. In longer arguments, it can be harder to pick out the main points and the main problems. Therefore, although some of the rules may seem obvious when first stated, remember that you have the benefit of a simple example. Other rules are hard enough to appreciate even in short arguments. Chapter 7 guides you into sketching and then elaborating an extended argument, considering objections, alternatives as you do. Chapter 8 guides you from there into writing an argumentative essay. Chapter 9 then adds rules specifically about oral presentation, and Chapter 10 about public debate. Again, all of these chapters depend on chapters 1 through 6, since extended arguments like these essentially combine and elaborate the kinds of short arguments that chapters 1 through 11 discuss. Don't skip ahead to the later chapters. Then, even if you come to this book primarily for help writing an essay or doing a presentation, the book is short enough that you can read it through from the beginning, so that when you arrive at those later chapters, you will have the tools you need to use them well. Instructors might wish to assign chapters 1 through 6 early in the term, and chapters 7 through 10 when the time comes for essays and public presentations and debates. Two appendices close out the book. The first is a listing of fallacies, types of misleading arguments that are so tempting and common. They even have their own names. The second offers 3 rules for constructing and evaluating definitions. Use them when you need them. Chapter 1 Short Arguments. Some General Rules. Arguments begin by marshaling reasons and organizing them in a clear and fair way. Chapter 1 offers general rules for composing short arguments. Chapters 2 through 6 discuss specific kinds of short arguments. Chapter 1 Resolve premises and conclusion. The very first step in making an argument is to ask yourself what you are trying to prove. What is your conclusion? Remember that the conclusion is the statement for which you are giving reasons. The statements that give your reasons are your premises. Let's say that you want to persuade your friends or children or parents or to eat more beans. Probably this does not seem like the world's most promising proposition or the most important either, but it is good first illustration. And diet does matter. Let's consider how you might make such an argument. You have your conclusion. We should eat more beans. That is your belief. But why? What are your reasons? You may need to state them for yourself for clarity, first of all, and then to check that they really are good reasons. Certainly, you have to state good reasons clearly if you expect others to agree or to change how they eat. So, again, what are your reasons? One main premise probably is that beans are healthier, higher in fibers and protein, and lower in fat and cholesterol than what most people eat now. So, properly supplemented, a diet of more beans could lead to a longer and more active life. You may not want to assume that your friends or family have heard or really appreciated this reason before. At least it is useful to be reminded. To get people motivated, it would be helpful to add another main premise as well. Since beans are often stereotyped as boring, why not also argue that bean dishes actually can be varied and exciting? Give some examples, your own favorite bean dish, maybe spicy black bean taco fillings, for instance, and hummus made from garbanzo beans. Now you've got an argument, good solid reasons for a clear conclusion. Even jokes can be arguments, though the reasons may seem silly. Living on Earth may be tough, but it includes a free ride around the sun every year. Getting a free ride around the sun is not as short of a reason you're normally expecting for bearing up when life gets tough. That's what makes the joke funny. But it is still a reason, an attempt to justify the claim that life isn't quite so bad as it may sometimes seem. It's a funny argument. In Rule 1, resolve premises and conclusions. The word resolve has two related meanings. One is to distinguish them. Your reasons are different from your conclusion. Keep them clearly separate. Get a free ride around the sun is a distinct idea from bearing up when life gets tough, and it logically comes first. It's a premise. Being better able to bear up might be something that follows. It's a conclusion. Once you have distinguished your premises and conclusions, be sure that both are claims that you want to commit to. This is the other meaning of resolve. If so, proceed. If not, change them. In any case, being clear to yourself is necessary before you can be clear to anyone else. This book offers you a ready list of different forms that arguments can take. Use this list to develop your premises. To defend a generalization, for instance, or two, it will remind you that you need to give a series of examples as premises, and it will tell you what sorts of examples to look for. If your conclusion requires a deductive argument like those explained in Chapter 6, the rules outlined in that chapter will tell you what types of premises you need. You may have to try several different arguments before you find one that works well. 2. Unfold your ideas in a natural order. Arguments move. Reasons and evidence lead to conclusions, but like any other form of movement, arguments may be graceful or clumsy, sharp or confused, clean or muddled. You want clarity and efficiency, even grace, if you can manage it. Take the argument about beans once more. If you are now going to write your argument out, how might you do it? One good way would be this: we should eat more beans. One reason is that beans are healthy. They are higher in fibers and protein and lower in fat and cholesterol than what most people eat now. Meanwhile, bean dishes can be quite varied and exciting too. Think of spicy black bean taco fillings or hummus. Each sentence in this passage prepares the way for the next one, and then the next one steps smoothly up to bat. The argument begins by stating its conclusion. This invites stating premises in turn, and the argument obliges by immediately stating a main premise and then giving a brief reason for it in turn, explaining why beans are healthy. Then it offers the main premise and examples. The argument could be laid out in different ways. For example, the second main premise could be first, and or the conclusion would be drawn at the end rather than the beginning. But either way, each part is in a good place. Getting an argument to unfold in this smooth way is an accomplishment, especially as arguments get more detailed and complex. It's not easy to work out the right place for each part, and plenty of wrong places are usually available. For example, suppose we wrote the argument like this instead. Think of a spicy black bean taco fillings or hummus. Beans are higher in fibers and protein and lower in fat and cholesterol than what most people eat now. Bean dishes can be quite varied and exciting. We should eat more beans. Beans are healthier. These are the same premises and conclusions, but they are in different order, and the passage leaves out the signposts and transition words that help readers identify premises and conclusions, such as one reason is that. The result is that the argument is totally garbled. The examples for the main premises, like how tasty bean dishes can be, are scattered through the passage, rather than cited right next to the statement of those premises. You have to read the passage twice just to be sure what the conclusion is. Don't count on your readers to be so patient. Expect to rearrange your argument several times to find the most natural order. Again, the rules offered in this book should help. You can use them to figure out not only what kinds of premises you need, but also how to arrange them in the best order. Start from reliable premises. Number 3. No matter how well you argue from premises to conclusion, your conclusion will be weak if your premises are weak. Nobody in the world today is really happy. Therefore, it seems that human beings are just not made for happiness. Why should we expect what we can never find? The premise of this argument is that the statement that nobody in the world today is really happy. Sometimes on certain rainy afternoons or in certain moods, this may almost seem true. But ask yourself if this premise really is plausible. Is nobody in the world today really happy? Ever? What about that free ride around the sun every year? At the very least, this premise needs some serious defense, and very likely it is just not true. This argument cannot show then that human beings are not made for happiness or that you or I should not expect to be happy. Sometimes it is easy to start from reliable premises. You may have well known examples at hand or reliable sources that clearly in agreement. Other times it is harder. If you are not sure about the reliability of a premise, you may need to do some research and or give an argument for the premise itself. If you find you cannot argue adequately for your premises, then of course you need to try some other premise. 4. Be concrete and concise. Avoid abstract, vague, and general terms. We hiked for hours in the sun is 100 times better than it was extended period of laborious exertion. Be concise too. Airy elaboration just loses everyone in a fog of words. No, regularly turning in for the night at an hour that precedes the time at which most of your compatriots go to bed, combined with practice of awakening at an hour that is earlier than the hour at which most others arise, will tend to the acquisition of such desirable personal traits as a resilient physical constitution, a comfortably well established financial situation, and the sorts of intellectual abilities and capacity for sagacious discernment and judgment that tend to be conducive to earning the respect of others. Yes, early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. The no version might overdo it just a bit, you think. But you see the point. Franklin's rhyme and rhythm help too. But the most important thing is that his words are sharp, simple, and few. 5. Build on substance, not overtone. Offer actual reasons. Don't just play on the overtones of words. No, having so disgracefully allowed her once proud passenger railroads to fade into obscurity, America is honor bound to restore them now. This is supposed to be an argument for restoring more passenger rail service, but it offers no evidence for this conclusion whatsoever. Just some emotionally loaded words, shop worn words too, like a politician on automatic. Did passenger rail fade because of something America did or didn't do? What was disgraceful about this? Many once proud institutions outlived their times after all, were not obliged to restore them all. What does it mean to say America is honor bound to do this? Have promises been made and broken? By whom? Much can be said for restoring passenger rail, especially in this era when the ecological and economic costs of highways are becoming enormous. The problem is that this argument does not say it. It lets the emotional charge of the words do all the work, and therefore really does not work at all. We're left exactly where we stand. Overtones may sometimes persuade even when they shouldn't, of course. But remember, here we are looking for actual concrete evidence. Likewise, do not try to make your argument look good by using emotionally loaded words to label the other side. Generally, people advocate a position for serious and sincere reasons. Try to figure out their view. Try to understand their reasons, even if you disagree entirely. For example, people who question a new technology are probably not in favor of going back to the caves. What are they in favor of? Maybe you need to ask. Likewise, a person who believes in evolution is not claiming that her grandparents were monkeys. And again, what does she think? In general, if you can't imagine how anyone could hold the view you are attacking, you probably just don't understand it yet. Short arguments. Number 6, use consistent terms. Short arguments normally have a single theme or thread. They carry one idea through several steps. Therefore, couch that idea in clear and carefully chosen terms, and mark each new step by using those very same terms again. In their classic composition handbook, The Elements of Style, William Strunk and E.B. White cite Jesus' famous Beatitudes as a compelling illustration of what they call parallel construction, or expressing coordinate ideas in a similar form. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Matthew chapter 5, verses 3 through 5. Blessed are the X and Y is the formula. It is not rephrased in each case like also, those who are X will be consecrated because Y. Instead, each sentence has exactly the same structure and exactly the same phrasing. Do the same for your arguments. When you learn to care for a pet, this is a no. When you learn to care for a pet, you learn to attend to the needs of a dependent creature, watching and responding carefully when a cat or dog needs you. Your ability to recognize needs and adjust your behavior accordingly can improve toward young children as well. Becoming a more responsive keeper of domestic animals can therefore enhance your familial caregiving skills too. Huh? Each sentence may be fairly clear by itself, but the connections between them are totally lost in the underbrush. Interesting underbrush, maybe, but too thick for moving effectively. Remember, arguments need to move. Yes. When you learn to care for a pet, you learn to attend to the needs of a dependent creature. When you learn to attend to the needs of a dependent creature, you learn to be a better parent. Therefore, when you learn to care for a pet, you learn to be a better person. The yes version might not be stylish in a flowery way, but is more than makes up for that by being absolutely crystal clear. One simple feature makes the difference. The no version uses a new phrase for each key idea every time the idea reoccurs. For example, when you learn to care for a pet, it is described again in the no version's conclusion as becoming a more responsive keeper of domestic animals, whereas the yes argument carefully and exactly repeats its key terms. If you are concerned about style, as sometimes you should be, of course, then go for the tightest argument and not the most flowery, the most concise. When you learn to care for a pet, you learn to attend to the needs of a dependent creature and therefore, in turn, learn to be a better parent. Appendix 2, Definitions. Some arguments require attention to the meaning of words. Sometimes we may not know the established meaning of a word, or the established meaning may be specialized. If the conclusion of your argument is that Weejacks are herbivores, your first task is to define your terms. Unless you are speaking to an Algonquin ecologist, if you encounter this conclusion elsewhere, the first thing you need is a dictionary. Other times, a term may be in popular use but still unclear. We debate assisted suicide, for example, but don't necessarily understand exactly what it means. Before we can argue effectively about it, we need an upon idea of what we are arguing about. Still, another kind of definition is required when the meaning of a term is contested. What is a drug, for example? Is alcohol a drug? Is tobacco? What if they are? Can we find any logical way to answer these questions? D1. When terms are unclear, get specific. A neighbor of mine was taken to task by the City Historic Districts Commission for putting up a 4-foot model lighthouse in her front yard. City ordinances prohibit any yard fixtures in historic districts. She was hauled before the commission and told to remove it. A furor erupted and the story got into the newspapers. Here the dictionary saved the day. According to Webster, a fixture is something fixed or attached as to a building, such as a permanent appendage or structural part. The lighthouse, however, was movable, more like a lawn ornament. Hence, it was not a fixture, seeing as the law did not specify any alternative definition, hence, not prohibited. When issues get more difficult, dictionaries are less helpful. Dictionaries definitions often offer synonyms for one thing that may be just as unclear as the word you're trying to define. Dictionaries also may give multiple definitions, so you have to choose between them, and sometimes dictionaries are just plain wrong. Webster's may be the hero of the last story, but it also defines a headache as a pain in the head, far too broad of a definition. A bee sting or cut on your forehead or nose would be a pain in the head, but not a headache. For some words, then you need to make the term more precise yourself. Use concrete, definitive terms rather than vague ones. Rule number 4, be specific without narrowing the term too much. Organic foods are foods produced with chemical fertilizers or pesticides. Definitions like this call a clear idea to the mind, something you can investigate or evaluate. Be sure, of course, to stick to your definition as you go on with your argument. No equivocation. One virtue of the dictionary is that it is fairly neutral. Webster defines abortion, for example, as the forcible expulsion of the mammalian fetus prematurely. This is an appropriate neutral definition. It is not up to the dictionary to decide if abortion is moral or immoral. Compare a common definition from one side of the abortion debate. Abortion means murdering babies. This definition is loaded. Fetuses are not the same as babies, and the term murder unfairly imputes evil intentions to a well intentioned people. That ending the life of a fetus is comparable to ending the life of a baby is an arguable proposition, but it is for an argument to show, not simply assumed by definition. See also rule number 5 and the fallacy of persuasive definition. You may need to do a little research. You will find, for example, that assisted suicide means allowing doctors to help aware and rational people arrange and carry out their own dying. It does not include allowing doctors to unplug patients without their consent. That would be some form of involuntary euthanasia, a different category. People may have good reasons to object to assisted suicide, so defined. But if the definition is made clear at the outset, at least the contending parties will be talking about the same thing. Sometimes we can define a term by specifying certain tests or procedures that determine whether or not it applies. This is called an operational definition. For example, Wisconsin law requires that all legislative meetings be open to the public. But what exactly counts as a meeting for purposes of this law? The law offers an elegant criterion. A meeting is any gathering of enough legislators to block action on the legislative measure that is the subject of the gathering. This definition is far too narrow to define the ordinary word meeting, but it does not accomplish the purpose of this law to prevent legislators from making crucial decisions out of the public eye. D2. When terms are contested, work from the clear cases. Sometimes the term is contested, that is, people argue over the proper application of the term itself. In that case, it's not enough simply to propose a clarification. A more involved kind of argument is needed. When a term is contested, you can distinguish three relevant sets of things. One set includes those things in which the term clearly applies. The second includes those things to which the term clearly does not apply. In the middle will be those things whose status is unclear, including the things being argued over. Your job is to formulate a definition that includes all the things that term clearly fits. It excludes all the things that the term clearly does not fit and draws the plainest possible line somewhere in between and explains why the line belongs there and not somewhere else. For example, consider what defines a bird. Exactly what is a bird anyway? Is it a bat? A bird? Is a bat a bird? To meet requirement 1, it is often helpful to begin with the general category genus, to which the things being defined belong. For birds, the natural genus would be animals. To meet requirements 2 and 3, we then need to specify how birds differ from other animals, the differentia. Our question, therefore, is precisely what differential birds, all birds and only birds from other animals. It is trickier than it may seem. We can't draw the line at flight, for example, because ostriches and penguins don't fly. So the proposed definition wouldn't cover all birds, violating the first requirement, and bumblebees and mosquitoes do. So the proposed definition would include some non birds, violating the second one. What distinguishes all and only birds, it turns out, is having feathers. Penguins and ostriches have feathers, even though they don't fly, they're still birds. But flying insects do not, and neither, in case you were wondering, do bats. Now consider a harder case. What defines a drug? Start again with the clear cases. Heroin, cocaine, and marijuana clearly are drugs. Air, water, most foods, and shampoos clearly are not drugs. Though all these are substances like drugs and all are ingested or applied to our body parts, unclear cases include tobacco and alcohol. Our question then is, does any general description cover all the clear cases of drugs and none of the substances that clearly aren't drugs, drawing a clear line in between? A drug has been defined, even by a presidential commission, as a substance that affects a mind or body in some way. But this definition is far too broad. It concludes air, water, food, and so on too, so it fails on the second requirement. We also can't find a drug as an illegal substance that affects mind or body in some way. This definition might cover more or less the right set of substances, but it does not meet requirement 3. It does not explain why the line belongs where it is. After all, part of the point of trying to define drug in the first place might well be to decide which substances should be legal and which should not. Defining a drug as an illegal substance short circuits this project. Technically, it commits the fallacy of begging the question. Try this. A drug is a substance used primarily to alter our state of mind in some specific way. Heroin, cocaine, and marijuana obviously count. Food, air, and water don't, because even though they have effects on the mind, the effects are not specific and are not primary reason why we eat, breathe, and drink. Unclear cases we then approach with the question, is the primary effect specific on the mind? Perception distorting and mood altering effects do seem to be the thief concern in current moral debates about drugs, so arguably, this definition captures the kind of distinction people really want to make. Should we add that drugs are addictive? Maybe not. Some substances are addictive, but not drugs. Certain foods, perhaps, and what if a substance that alters our state of mind in some specific way turns out to be non addictive? As some people have claimed about marijuana, for example. Is it therefore not a drug? Maybe addiction defies drug abuse, but not drug as such. D3 definitions don't replace arguments. Definitions help us to organize our thoughts, group like things we with like and pick out key similarities and differences. Sometimes after words are clearly defined, people may even discover that they do not really disagree about an issue at all. By themselves, though definitions seldom settle difficult questions, we seek to define drug, for example, partly decide what sort of stance to take towards certain substances. But such a definition cannot answer this question by itself. Under the proposed definition, coffee is a drug. Caffeine certainly alters the state of mind in specific ways. It is even addictive. But does it follow that coffee should be banned? No, because the effect is mild and socially positive for many people. Some attempt to weigh benefits against harms is necessary before we can draw any conclusion. Marijuana is a drug under the proposed definition. Should it be banned? Just as with coffee, more argument is necessary. Some people claim that marijuana has only mild and socially positive effects too. Supposing they're right, you could argue that marijuana shouldn't be banned even though it is a drug like coffee. Others argue that it has far worse effects and tends to be a gateway to harder drugs besides. If they're right, you could argue for banning marijuana whether it is a drug or not. Or perhaps marijuana is most akin to certain antidepressants and stimulants. Medicines that take note also turn out to be drugs on the proposed definition, but call not for bans for control. Alcohol, meanwhile, is a drug under the proposed definition. In fact, it is most widely used drug after all. It harms more its harms are enormous, including kidney disease, birth defects, half of all the traffic deaths, and more. Should it be limited or banned? Maybe, although there are counter arguments too. Once again, though, this question is not settled by the determination that alcohol is a drug. Here is the effects that make the difference. In short, definitions contribute to clarity, but seldom do they exactly know. Clarify your terms. Know exactly what questions you're asking, but don't expect that clarity alone will answer him. In short, definitions contribute to clarity, but seldom do they make arguments all by themselves. Clarify your terms. Know exactly what questions you're asking, but don't expect that clarity alone will answer them.